watching us as your children and providing for whatever things we need. We ask that you be with these we've requested prayer for, Lord. Be with us that are here, Lord. Let your Holy Spirit be in this place. Let the presence of the Lord be here today. We pray in your precious name, and we thank you for it today. Amen. By the way, a friend of mine, I forgot, Bonnie Colorox. Her son was found about a week and a half ago in a motel room or hotel room dead. So they still haven't found out exactly what's going on. So remember her. She was the lady in one of the wheelchairs at the back. And she told me just before she left yesterday, so let's remember her in prayer. Our lesson today is Daniel, and if I hold these up here, you'll know why I'm totally. Today we will begin our study on one of the most unique books of the Bible in the Old Testament, and that's Daniel. It was written around 537 BC. It can be summarized in two words: miracles and mysteries. If you read the book of Daniel, it won't take you long to understand why those two words describe it. In the first half of the book, chapters 1 through 6, it contains well-known miracle stories, such as Daniel and his friends, and the lion's den, and the fiery furnace. We know all of those stories. During this time, the king of Babylon wanted to kill him. Do you remember why he wanted to kill him?
Yeah.
He'd had a dream, and he couldn't remember his dream. And he got all of his wise men and his sorcerers and brought them in and asked them to tell him his dream and then tell him what it meant. Well, they got upset with him. Nobody can tell you the dream, they said. If you'll tell us the dream, we'll repeat it. Well, he got mad. He said, if I tell you the dream, then you'll make up something. He knew them well enough to know they would, to please me. He said, but I'm not going to tell you the dream. So he ordered all of them to be killed. And this was right at the time Daniel and his three friends had been accepted as part of the king's eunuchs there. So they would have been killed too. But God intervened for Daniel, and we'll find out probably in the next couple of weeks why and how he intervened. But the second half of the book is sometimes called the Revelation of the Old Testament, because of all the mysteries and the dreams and things that Daniel has part in. And it also is because God presents the future of his kingdom. He lets us know that he is going to have a kingdom, and at one time he's going to ultimately remove all human kingdoms, and he's going to set his kingdom up to be ruled by Jesus Christ. This is all in the book of Daniel. So we have a lot we're going to be learning in the next few weeks. Okay, before we go to that, I'm going to go and take a look at Jeremiah 25. Why was Israel or Judah fixing to have to go into captivity? And we're going to read in Jeremiah. He makes it very clear. You can look at it if you want to in your Bible. Jeremiah chapter 25 and verses 3 through 12. I'm going to read 3 and 4 to give you the background, and then I'm just going to quickly tell you what the other verses are saying that we need to know. From the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, even unto this day, now this is Jeremiah talking, that is the 23rd year, the word of the Lord hath come unto me, and I have spoken unto you, rising early and speaking, but you have not hearkened. And the Lord hath sent unto you all his servants the prophets, rising early and sending them, but you have not hearkened, nor inclined your ear to him. For 23 years now, Jeremiah has been telling Judah what God's going to do if they don't turn away from their sinful ways. Now, let's look what are the messages in his message to them. First of all, in verse 5, he says, quickly, turn away every one of you from his evil way and evil doings, and dwell in the land God gives you forever and ever. What are they doing? Their evil deeds and evil doings and things like that. verse 6 it says, do not go after or worship or serve other gods. Provoke me not to anger with the works of your hand, and I, God, will not hurt you. In verse 7, you have not hearkened or listened to me, but have provoked me to anger with the works of your hands. And I think this is the idol worships that they've done. Verses 8 and 9 says, because you have not heard my word, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them again into this land, and its inhabitants, and against nations round about, and will utterly destroy them, and make them an astonishment. God's saying very clearly what he's going to do if Judah doesn't. For 23 years this has been preached to me. If you go back, you can read it, where God has said it over and over. And these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. He says specifically that they're going to have to serve the king of Babylon. He tells them who's going to do it to him, okay? And in verse 12 he says, after 70 years, I, which is God, will punish the king of Babylon with the land of the Chaldeans and make it totally destroyed. So we know what's going to happen. This is leading up to what happens in our lesson today, where they're taken into captivity. By the time today's lesson, the prophet Jeremiah had warned the teachers, the leaders, for 23 years of Judah. One commentary said he didn't have one conversion during that time. Isn't that sad? That their unfaithfulness would bring God's judgment by bringing a Babylonian invasion to Judah, but they did not heed his warning. Egypt had been defeated by King Nebuchadnezzar, and Judah would be the next. Now, for a while, Judah had depended on Egypt to help him, but Nebuchadnezzar went in and destroyed Egypt and took that out of the way. Jeremiah gives us a clear picture as to why God's people are going into captivity. I am of the opinion that nothing ever happens to us, something terrible, without us knowing why. God tells us, if he's warned us about it, we know why, okay? Now, it's not as something just suddenly happens like that, I don't mean. But a lot of people complain and all because of things that are happening, and it's because of their past. They have not listened and they have not obeyed God. And that's Judah's problem now. God had removed his protective covering from Judah. That's the sad part. He had protected them a few years earlier. We'll find out he had helped Hezekiah, protected them against the Assyrian armies, where Israel had been destroyed. But here, Judah had still not listened to the warning of the prophet. How would they live as God's people without access to the temple? Would they ever return to the promised land? Now again, I'm telling you, I'm having to do this because my contacts are playing tricks with me today. And I don't like it. Usually I do it down here, but we'll just go with it. Daniel tells us or addresses these questions, and he tells them about living in a world but not being of the world. And that's what Daniel has to face in this lesson today. We have many examples in the Old Testament of people who remained faithful to God. We know that Enoch and Noah were faithful to God during a very terrible time. And we also know here in Daniel that Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Ezekiel all remained true to God, even though they were taken into captivity and removed from their lands. So Daniel and the 3 Hebrew children are not the only ones who were faithful to God. We might ask, how did Daniel, I know this part, how did Daniel, a 16 to 18-year-old is what they say, how did he end up getting into be a captive of Babylon? Well, it goes all the way back when Solomon reigned. At the end of Solomon's reign, they divided Israel. the northern kingdoms, which was called Israel, and which was 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom, which was called Judah, which consisted of 2 tribes. God divided those two during this time. The northern kingdom was captured by Assyria in 772, and just as I said, then Hezekiah trusted God to protect him and went to God when Assyria came against him, and we know that God answered Hezekiah's prayer and protected Judah, so they were not captured by the Assyrians. But still, many years later, which is actually 605 BC, they have still not turned to God like they need to. They're not doing what they need to, so here comes the Babylonians this time. Okay, verses 1 and 2, David, you started, I guess.
In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God.
Okay, who was the king of Judah?
Jehoiakim.
Jehoiakim, K-I-M, okay? Now, who was the king of Babylon? We know this guy. Nebuchadnezzar. Now, where were these captives going to be taken?
Okay.
To Shinar, which is actually part of Babylon. They were going to take them there and hold them captive. Now, the complete story of Nebuchadnezzar and what he did is in 2 Kings chapter 24. Jehoiakim had to surrender because God had removed his protective custody from him. We are in a bad shape if God takes his protective custody away from us. And we need to be careful. We need to pray hard for America, because it could happen if God doesn't, if we don't do and repent like we need to, okay? God had repeatedly warned Judah, and they had failed to repent, first of idolatry. They had failed to observe the Sabbaths like they were supposed to of the land. And not only that, they had not returned to God with their whole heart. That's just 3 of them. We hear later of other things that they had failed to do in obedience to God. God's judgment for Judah had finally arrived. There was nothing they could do about it. Nebuchadnezzar was coming. He went into the city of Jerusalem. He took out some of the young princesses and king's kids and some of the craftsmen and things like that. He took them into his custody. He took some of the temple's worship idols, the temple in Jerusalem. He took some of the God's pieces from there, and he took them back to Babylon and put them in the temple of Marduk, M-A-R-D-U-K, Marduk, their god. And he thought he'd really done something. We're going to find out he was only an instrument there, okay? They took the captives, they took the brightest young people, and that included 4 men. Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. That's the 4. Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. Those are the 4 we're going to be talking about today. Now, did you know how far they had to travel? Have you ever thought about that when they were taken captive? If you look at Ezra, you don't have to right now, 7:6 through 8. Ezra was released and allowed to go back to Jerusalem after he had been in captivity for a while. It took him 4 months to go back, and it was 900 miles. So these young men had been taken captive, and they were 900 miles away from everything they knew and recognized. Besides being in a country with people they didn't know, and a king that was willing to kill people if he didn't like what they did. So they were in a predicament. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had to return home before he could do a lot more damage to Jerusalem. He did take some of the young people and the craftsmen and took them back. He also took a few of the treasures from the temple. But his dad died. And because his dad died, he had to return back to Babylon. And it was several years before he came back. But one time he came back, I think it was 587 BC. He came back, and this time he destroyed he took everything from the temple, he burned it to the ground, and he burned the city of Jerusalem to the ground. So he accomplished what he didn't get to accomplish on his first trip. All right, let's go to verses 3 and 4.
And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princesses, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning, and knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learned and the tongue of the
Chaldeans. Now, the head of the eunuchs was given specific instructions of what kind of children or young people to get. What was the guidelines for it? They had to be what? Nope.
King's seed.
They had to be of the king's seed or princes, or they had to have no blemish. They had to be smart, intelligent, wise, even though they were young. So he had a reason. Why did he want these kind of kids?
To train them in the ways of Babylon, and then let them be counselors.
He wanted to train them in the ways of the Babylonians, and he wanted them to learn the culture and the language. The original language of the Babylonian was Aramaic. But there was a old Babylonian language that was very difficult. And he wanted these boys to know that. And it was all boys, ladies. They didn't take girls. Aren't we blessed? But he did. And he was going to train them for 3 years. Okay? They was going to be trained for 3 years. And these people who took them captive were going to treat them good. They were going to feed them. And we're going to find out what he was going to do. But he was specific about who he wanted and what he wanted on these young men. Now, it was prophesied in Isaiah 39:7, and of the sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. All of this that's happening to Daniel was prophesied years before. But Judah did not heed it. They did not listen to it. And the king only wanted the best and the smartest and the most intelligent. The words wisdom, knowledge, and understanding are significant in the book of Daniel. Okay, the word wise and wisdom, which is hokmah, are found 25 times in Daniel. The word understanding, which is by-we-in, appears 23 times. Gifted, sakal, is 10 times. And knowledge, yada, appears 23 times. So the book is full of wisdom, knowledge, understanding. And that's what all transpires during this book. Now,
And Vicki?
yes,
I was just gonna add, he's doing this to help his own region look good too. These
Yeah.
men will enhance.
they'll do a lot for his
yeah,
current astrologers and
team.
sorcerers that he has, okay? What did the king of Babylon want these children? Why we said to teach them his language, okay? Now, the Chaldeans was the most prominent ethnic group in Babylon, but the word Chaldeans also stands for the magicians and the diviners which were there. And they used all kinds of witchcraft and mystery and sorcery to prove that they were wise, in other words, which they weren't. Now, here's the thing. If these Hebrews were to learn their language and literature, it would mean being indoctrinated. That's the word to use. That's what they were going to do. To the Babylonian culture, the worldview, and religion, which would include forbidden occult practices. This was a dangerous thing for Daniel and the young Hebrews, and any of the other Hebrews that happened to be in the king's palace. The only ones we know of are these four that we're talking about. But they were in a dangerous position. The young Hebrews would be faced with a challenge. Would they be able to retain their faith in God and their unique identity as Israelites? What we know, when we know that God is with us, Psalms 23:4, we can endure even the most difficult circumstances. We need to remember that. When things get too hard for us, we can endure it because of God being with us, okay? All right, let's read 5 through 7.
And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judea, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Ezra, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and Mishael of Meshach, and to Ezra of Abednego.
Okay. These are names that are given. Now, according to this, they were named. Why do you think they were named? Babylonian names.
Like with the gods of Babylon.
They're trying to indoctrinate them because of that. We find out they gave them all Babylonian names, and I'm going to go through those in a minute and show you the difference between their name and the Christian name, or the name God had given them. Because we know in Israel that names meant something, usually pertaining to God or something that related to God. So we know this. So these men were given names by the official eunuch, the head man that was looking after them. And one of the reasons we know is that he wanted them to think and know and act like Babylonians. And so one of the first ways they started was by giving him a name. Daniel's new name was Belteshazzar. Daniel meant, God is my judge. Belteshazzar meant, may Baal, which was the Babylonian god, protect his life. So see, they're changing, trying to bring him away from their God of Israel.
You're trying to use influence.
Yep. Hananiah's name was Shadrach. Hananiah meant beloved by the Lord, or Yahweh is gracious. Shadrach meant under the command of Aku, which was the sun gods of the Babylonians. See, again, they're going away from the God of the universe to all of these idols. Mishael, his name was Meshach, and Mishael meant who is like God. Meshach meant who is like Aku, which again was the god of the Babylonians. Grace, guest to the king. Azariah's new name was Abednego. Azariah meant the Lord is my help. Abednego meant servant of Nego, or Nebo, which was the god of learning and writing. All of these names were very specifically given to these boys to draw them away from God and their homeland. They were trying their best to indoctrinate them. In each case, the Hebrew name spoke of the true God and his character and praised the God of Israel. But the Babylonian name spoke of Babylon gods and wanted to change their religious loyalty. They wanted to completely change these kids. What do you think was the purpose of the food, the names, and education? In the food section, they were supposed to eat what the king ate and drink what the king drank. Now, what was to be wrong with that? The meat was usually offered to idols. The drink, we're going to find out if I get to, I'm trying to talk this so I don't have to read this word for word. The drink, wine, was usually also dedicated to the false gods in these old cultures. But God didn't want them, and they're offered wine. But we're going to find out that Daniel is going to reject the meat and the wine because he knows the danger of it being offered to an idol and the danger of the wine being offered to or presented to the gods. So why does he do this? He's trying to change them. This was an effect at total indoctrination, with the goal of making these young Jewish men leave behind their Hebrew God and culture. The effort was to redefine their identity, to sever the ties with their heritage, and to impose a new cultural imprint. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make these young men totally different from the four Hebrew children that had been brought to him. And he knew what he was doing, because I'm sure he has done this before, because he was good at capturing countries and taking captives. So I'm sure he knew what he was doing, and he figured this would work, but he had come against 3, 4 boys, young men, that had a made-up mind, okay? No doubt they found other ways to maintain their identity as children of the one true God, even with Babylonian names. Everything was done to separate these boys from their Jewish roots. In short, brainwashing, indoctrination. Babylon didn't want them to remember or think of their real home. They wanted the Jews to be so caught up in the good things of Babylon that they had no time to think of their homeland or to think of their God. That is a hard thing, but they had to live through it. Now, today we have to be careful too. Do you know that Satan is using the same kind of techniques to get at us? Satan wants us to be indoctrinated into the ways of the world. He wants us to be named after the world, not necessarily changing our name, but they don't want us to be called Christians. They want to call us anything else but Christians. He wants us to eat or taste and take part in what the world does. There's a lot of things out there as Christians that we have to avoid because we know the history of them and the background of them. But Satan wants to get us into that so he can indoctrinate us. And finally, he wants to educate us into the ways of the world. Education is not bad, but there's some of that education we need to stay away from. So be careful out there. Watch out for Satan. Don't let him get us sidetracked and get us beginning to act like this. I like this. The bottom line for our lives is clear. Don't let the world change your name or your character. Don't base your identity as a Christian on what the world labels you. We don't have to be what the world wants us to be. Yes?
Our children and young adults are facing this so much with the media,
Yes.
with their phones. It is all rigged to put the culture of the world more in front of them.
Right.
How they should dress, what they should participate in, and take into their bodies, take into their mind. But Satan is using the media, the phones, which are so convenient and helps us in many ways. But it is used. Our children and young people are facing this so strongly. because, and the confusion of
Yeah.
all the info that comes in. And they're facing this right on, just as the young men in Babylon did.
The thing is, today, Daniel and them faced a lot, but they didn't have the multimedia things that we have today. And it's not like Satan is so much trying to get the older people. He's after those young ones.
I just want to say this, because a lot of people don't know this, but he's in school.
Yeah.
And he has come home and asked me what, and I'm not gonna go into it, but the school system is pushing, not having a gender, male or woman,
I know.
and, he knows things at 8 years old that I would never, from school.
That's it. And the thing about it is, a lot of parents aren't aware of it. I'm sure Heather and Teddy face a bunch of this stuff, have faced it as pastors and all, and children. We need to pray for our kids. If you don't have a kid, you need to pray for the other kids that you know. I've got 4 nieces and nephews. I call their name every day because I know they've had a mixed up life. And I know that Satan's trying to pull them into the wrong way. But we need to do that. We need to watch that and pray, because Daniel and them had it bad, but it's not easy for our young people to, okay, we need to go, this lesson keeps going, okay. All right, verse 8 through 10.
But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love for the prince of the eunuchs. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse, liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head too.
Okay, the young men were faced with a discouraging prospect of losing their culture and religious identities. Their heritage was being threatened. Their identities were blocking, trying to change their names. It was trying to block everything that came from the past. And it wasn't easy to avoid, because these young men were going to be 3 long years studying what the king of Babylon wanted them to study. And that included a lot of history and a lot of, I'm sure there was sorcery and all kinds of stuff like that in it. But because of Daniel, Daniel made a courageous step. He said, I am not going to defile myself. That took some bravery, because the king could have easily have thought he was defying him, disobeying him, and he could have easily had Daniel immediately killed. But Daniel did not just, he had his heart set on obeying God, and Daniel used a lot of wisdom. If you look at it, I'm going to go through it pretty quick. He used wisdom in how he approached this head of the eunuchs, Melzar. He used a lot of wisdom in it. Now, one writer says this about Daniel. Daniel did not object to the name given to him. We have no word he said he didn't want the name. He knew who he was, and others could call him what they wanted to. Sometimes we need to take that advice. He did not object to the Babylonian education, because he was already a well-trained young man, because he was one of the king's sons in that area, or princes. So he was well educated already, though older than he was. But he did object to the food from the king's table, because eating it was in direct disobedience to God's word. Now, all these two things, the education and the name, he could deal with. But when it came to defying his body, knowing he would be defying his body, he couldn't do that. And so he approaches the guy in a very easy way. He knew that he could be killed by doing this. And God had given Daniel favor with this eunuch, Belshazzar. And because of that favor, he felt like he could approach him. And we're going to find out he did it very wisely. He didn't do it in defiance or anything like that. He asked this Melzar to consider testing them for 10 days. And that's what we're fixing to read about. He didn't just say, I'm not going to do this. I don't care what you do to me. One of the statements I read, it says, we can be Christians and stand up for God without being obnoxious. I like that word. We don't have to be obnoxious. In fact, you'll find out if you go about it in a wise way, you'll get a lot more accomplished than making somebody else mad. And that's what happened. All right, let's read verses 11 through 14.
Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech you, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with your servants. So he consented to them in this matter, and proved them 10 days.
Okay, now remember, they're going to be taught for 3 years before they appear before King Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel suggested to this eunuch, let us have a 10-day test. Now, we would think about that. That wouldn't be a very long enough test for you to show up looking fatter and healthier and better than us. But he said, give us 10 days. Feed us water, and that the other meat was what they call a zoroa. And it was actually grain and veggies that grew from seeds, okay? And so I'm sure the grain, there was some bread involved in it somewhere because of the, not necessarily the wrong kind with the yeast and all that, but here it identifies it as seeds from grain and vegetables. So, and the water, and we talked about why they didn't want to drink the wine, because the wine had been offered to gods. They were pretty sure of that. So, the thing about it is, for 10 days, the guy agreed to it. Now, he agreed to it carefully, because he knew that if it didn't come out right, that king would look at him one time, and that would have been the end of it. He'd have killed him. That king was unmerciful. He had no trouble killing the staff he had if they went against him. So he was very cautious, and he was willing to trust Daniel that things would be all right. Now, have you ever thought that that food was not enough to make a difference in those boys? Why did it do a difference? What was it? It was the hand of God. God made that react to their bodies in such a way that it produced the effect they needed to affect. And you know, God can do things for us sometimes like that. I'm not necessarily meaning food or anything, but God cares about us, and He's going to help us with things if we allow Him to. And He helped these boys. And what happened at the end of 10 days, do you remember? We'll read that. Let's read it in verses 15 and 16. I'm hurrying because I want to make sure Brother Herschel gets time to preach to me. Who's got 15 and 16?
And at the end of 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink, and gave them pulse.
worked because we know God made it work. God knew what Daniel had done. He knew that Daniel wanted to be undefiled. He did not want to defile. And because God knew Daniel, and he trusted Daniel too, he saw that Daniel's request was granted, that they did come out looking fatter. I don't know if I like the fatter part or not, but they did look better than the others. But God took care of them. Now, Daniel entrusted himself to God, and God came through. He did not abandon Daniel and the others, even though it was a trying experience. This was not easy for those boys. It wasn't. Daniel showed wisdom, like James 3:17 says, but the wisdom that is from above, that's the secret, is first pure, then peaceable. How did Daniel approach his unit? Peaceably. Gentle, he approached him gentle. Easy to be entreated, full of mercy, good fruits, without partiality, and without hypocrisy. Folks, that's the kind of wisdom we need, especially in this world we're living in today. We need that kind of wisdom. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood out in the crowd because of their faith, not because of anything else, but their faith. When we are pressured by the world to conform to its standards, may we have the courage and confidence to obey and remain true to God. And I believe the closer we get to the end, the more we're going to be tested with that. And we need to know. Now, Daniel, did you notice that Daniel didn't have to fight this all by himself? God had 3 young men there with him. And over in chapter 3, we find out they were of the same stock that Daniel was. We find out they're just as strong and determined to be true to God as Daniel was. And so God provided somebody there with him. And we need to have people, good Christian friends, that we love and they trust and we can believe that they care to help us when we go through trials. So we don't need to be islands by ourselves. We need to be there with God and the ones that God put in our path. Okay. Let's go. Daniel was also given, the boys were given learn all kinds of knowledge and skills and learning, okay, and wisdom. But Daniel was given visions and dreams to interpret. And we'll learn later as we study more about Daniel, this was the main part of his ministry during this time, his visions and dreams. But you know, they made a statement here. It says, this shows that purity of heart and faithfulness to God come before enlightenment in divine mysteries. I think what they're saying is you can't understand divine mysteries if you're not pure in heart. Think about it. We have to be true to God and know God in order to understand His divine mysteries that are there for us. The word vision is used 32 times in Daniel, and it indicates special revelation of future events. Dreams.
Yeah, I think the key is that not to question, to let God lead you. And the only way God can lead you is not to question what He's doing.
You have to trust Him. You really do. You don't quite
Walking in the Spirit.
walking in the Spirit. That's the big thing. When we are walking, I think that's the purity of heart, is when we're walking in the Spirit, our hearts become more and more pure towards God. And God can speak to us and show us things. And Daniel,
And only you know that. Nobody can show
Daniel
you.
was very, very close to God. We can see that from what we see. And that's one reason God revealed it. And you can read about other people in the Bible that walked very close to God, and God revealed certain things to them that He didn't reveal to others.
They,
How close are we walking? That's my question sometimes.
they
Okay.
were such yielded servants
Yeah.
to the Lord.
That's it.
And, and, and God tries to tell his people all the time, be yielded to me.
Yes.
Yield to your Creator.
Sometimes we want to know everything, Sherry, but sometimes God only gives us just enough to make us take the first step. And we have to trust him for the next step and the next. Charles Spurgeon said something once, and I wrote it down here. Listen carefully. Wisdom is the right use of knowledge. You got that? To know is not to be wise. Just because we know a lot does not mean we're wise. That's what he's saying. Many men know a great deal and are all the greater fools for it. Have you ever seen someone like that seems to know everything but they appear stupid? You ever thought something like that? There is no fool, so great a fool as knowing fool. But to know how to use knowledge is to have wisdom. Knowledge is important, but knowledge can be dangerous if you don't have wisdom. If you know how to work a bomb, that's good knowledge. But you better need to know how the wisdom to know how to use it correctly. And it's the same thing with cars. You can know how to drive a car all you want to, but do you have the wisdom to drive it where it's not dangerous and hurt to other people? So knowledge is good, but to know how to use knowledge is wisdom. And that's what we need. We need the wisdom of God. All right, let's go to verses 18 through 20.
Now at the end of days, that the kings had said he should bring them in. Then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all of his realm.
How much better were these four men?
10 times.
By now, they're probably in their early 20s. 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers in Nebuchadnezzar's realm. That's a lot of people, a lot of times for them to be better than. Okay. Nebuchadnezzar put Daniel and his friends on his staff of advisors, which included many magicians who were skilled at interpreting dreams and astrologers who interpreted a variety of signs in the stars and conjured up spells claiming to be able to tell the future through magic and occult practices. These four young men were put in the midst of all of those men. And we'll understand why they did what they did to Daniel in a little bit. Because they were in the midst of these people who were supposed to be super smart, super intelligent, and able to do anything. But we find out they're not. These were the magicians and enchanters that he had. Now he found these men better. Now let me ask you a question. Does God watch and act for those who fear him and put him first?
Yes.
How many of you really believe that? All right, let's take a look real quick, and I'll read it at Psalms 33, and I'm going to verses 12 through 15, and then 18 and 19. Let's cut out a couple. It says in Psalms 33, if you ever wonder if God is watching you and taking care of you, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance. The Lord looketh from heaven, he behold all the sons of men. From the place of his habitation he looketh upon all the inhabitants of the earth. He fashioneth their heart alike, he considereth all their work. Then in verse 18 and 19 it says, behold, the eye of the Lord is upon them that fear him, upon them that hope in his mercy. God's eye is upon us. We don't ever have to doubt that. To deliver their soul from death and to keep them alive in famine. In other words, not only to protect us from death, but to feed us and give us everything we need. We have an awesome God that takes care of us. We learned from Daniel we need the need for a simple, uncomplicated faith. Listen, a faith that says God watches, God cares, and God acts for us. Our God is always watching, always caring, and always acting if we need him to act for our behalf. He's always there. Verse 21 is the last verse. Is that you? Who?
Yeah. And Daniel continued even into the first year of King Cyrus.
Daniel's worked there, and he stayed there. Let's see, what was his first year? He started until the Cyrus of Persia took over the Babylonians. They conquered the Babylonians. Daniel was in there 69 years or longer. And during this time, he was in a very complicated situation because he was under these rulers, these emperors that were ruling. And I don't think one of them was really good. One or two of them helped God's people and it sent them back to Jerusalem. But a lot of those rulers, they just seemed to kill their helpers as look at them. I mean, they had no problem with that. And so he had a hard time. He was disliked. He was made fun of and everything. We're grateful for the faithfulness of God that is displayed in the first chapter of Daniel. Although God brings judgment, he remains loyal to his people. His ultimate goal of judgment is redemption. Even when he was having judgment on Judah and Israel, God at the root of it wanted to see redemption in those people. And today, sometimes judgment comes our way is because God's wanting to bring about redemption. He doesn't do it to be mean, just to be mean. He does it because he cares. And he wants people to receive him and accept him and be redeemed. Daniel illustrated to us how to conquer a difficult trial, and I've just got a couple of little things. And glorify God before others in the midst of testing. This is how Daniel did it. First, the heart must be set. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not compromise. That's the first thing we have to do. Devil, you're not going to make me compromise. I'm going to stay true to God. Secondly, the life must be positive. Daniel found favor among his superiors. He did. Possibly because of the way he treated them, just like having compassion on Melzar when he was giving them the test. He knew Melzar's life would be in danger. Okay? Thirdly, protests must be courteous. I don't know if our protesters today believe that or not. Daniel found favor with his superiors. Protests must be courteous. Daniel made a polite request to be excused from the king's table, showing discretion. Standing for Jesus Christ does not mean we have to be obnoxious. And I agree with that 100%. We can stand and be true to Christ without being obnoxious. Self-denial must be sought. They were willing to pay the cost, but prepared to stand fast for Christ no matter the cost. We need to be that way. We need to be ready to stand up to Christ, for Christ, no matter what's costing me. And the last one, the test must be boldly put. They suggest that we need to be proud or thankful when God allows our Christian faith to be tested. We need to be thankful for that. A couple more things. Like Daniel, we may find ourselves under pressure to conform to non-Christian attitudes and behavior. Therefore, like Daniel, we must commit ourselves to resist the temptation of the enemy and refuse to compromise when placed under pressure. We have to refuse. We can't accept it. We must trust God to make a way for us, to open doors, to work miracles on our behalf. We have to trust Him. And we must rest in the knowledge that God is in control of our lives, our circumstances, and our future. We need to have those things embedded in our faith, knowing those things that God is for us. We will discover the timely truth that God strengthens His people so they can remain steadfast under pressure, and we can resist the temptations to compromise our faith. And just like Daniel, we can shine as lights in the dark world. But we have to do it. We do. We have to make up our mind, I am not going to be defiled by the world or by Satan. And each one of us has different tests in different areas. And we need to stand up for Christ. I believe that is one of the main things that Christians now need to do more than they've ever done. Stand up for Christ and show people how good God is to us
Amen.
in the midst of trials.
And Vicky,
That's-
we need to stand up and love.
Well, that's one thing I liked about Daniel and the way he handled things. Daniel went out to destroy that eunuch. He wasn't. He didn't go behind the eunuch's back and ask the king for it either. He went the way of wisdom. And that's what we need. We need wisdom. I apologize that I had to use the papers like I did. Usually I can leave them down here and read them. But I'm having some trouble with these contacts, so I'm gonna have to do something about it. But thank you for being patient. We have another lesson on Daniel next week. I believe it's chapter 2. We have a lot to learn from Daniel. And so if you get a chance to read it, and ask yourself, God, what were you teaching Daniel that I need to know? Okay?